someone who had previously worked on previous Australian campaigns, and he was actually in the audience in Tokyo when that campaign was unveiled to Japanese policymakers and business people. And there was just this horrified silence in the room when the campaign appeared. Because within Japanese culture, that is an extremely aggressive, extremely rude kind of slogan to have, so completely inappropriate for that market. So that's one example where it's expensive to adapt. That's why companies and countries don't do it. It's much cheaper just to make one communication and just spread that everywhere. But that is not a productive use of resources if the message is going to be completely rejected. I think in the case of Korea, getting back to the first point you're making, that there's basically there's the other Asian countries, then there's everywhere else. And the everywhere else would need to be segmented. The US and Europe will have different needs and be receptive to different messages. Personally, I don't see the Korean wave ever having anywhere near the same impact in Western Europe as it does in Asia. So, I mean, Korean policymakers are very keen to promote the spread of Korean culture globally, but they're going to have to be very analytical in what aspects of that culture they choose to promote, say, in Western Europe.
My question relates to the media that is going to have to play a large role. And just to take the examples of, say, the US and the UK, the media is very domestically focused. They like scandal. And they really don't pay much attention to foreigners unless there's a crisis. Again, taking the example of Japan, they get very frustrated because, particularly in comparison to reporting on China, they felt neglected for a long time. Now they have a crisis, so they may not like the reporting. But otherwise, what you get are the sort of weird stories like, monkeys in hot springs, the human interest things. Since the media in these host countries really have to be the ones to disseminate the message, however good the message is, how do you work with that kind of insularity?
Yeah, there's no easy way to overcome that. And the media will never change, and it's human nature that the bad news, the horror stories, that's what sells, and that's never going to change. I think, however, what can be done, and what some countries do and other countries don't, is just quite simply you hire good PR agencies in your target countries, and that is a way of at least stimulating some coverage. And there are good things that you can get coverage for. Food culture, primarily, is one area which some countries are extremely good at promoting good news stories very, very well on their country. Malaysia is an example of that. And the Malaysian government has actually gone a lot further than other governments in that the Malaysian government owns and runs restaurants in Tokyo and London, and that's specifically part of a strategy to promote the soft power, the attractiveness of the culture of that country. So to give a different example of the same thing, Russia, and specifically Vladimir Putin, hired a PR agency in New York specifically to kind of humanize Putin's image within the US.
It's not working.
Well, yeah, it's certainly got a lot of coverage, because it was no coincidence that there was a flurry of photos of Putin over 2 or 3 weeks, kind of bare-chested, fishing in the river, flying a plane, his judo DVD, all that kind of thing got a lot of coverage. Whether or not it had the desired effect, you could stagger it.
And before we go to the next question, we definitely have time. I'm a very rude host just because I know he doesn't mean our guest visiting does. So if you would please introduce yourself. Yes, Mr. Trump. Both of you.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I have a sort of a background question about how you hire this project. Because you mentioned already, other question already raised the question. Also, you already corrected. There are different perceptions by different regions, either the perception in EU or European countries or Asian countries. And I wonder, where the perception you got really focus on. Basically, I understand that you got University of Tokyo, or just combined with Japan, just in logistically, or you have any efforts to get any position of Korea elsewhere, and also you have thought of finding out the identity of Korea or Korean or national brand of Korea in the perspective of not just horizontal perspective, but more rigid horizontal, where you do that. So I just am curious to know in your experience how you tie up and how lengthy period you have dealt into this issue with Korea. Just to know some background.
Yeah, it's for me it's a relatively recent focus on Korea, and I actually started when I moved to Tokyo beginning of 2008. I was approached by the Korea Foundation, and they invited me to a conference in Seoul. I went there, and since then I've written some articles and had some dealings with the Korea Foundation. Specifically, what's I'm hoping to focus on in the coming year. I put in a proposal for research projects on the Korean diaspora and what Korea can do to actually optimize this 7 million person network that exists that is in some cases extremely willing to help create a better image and reputation for Korea. And I actually received an email from someone who used to work at Samsung and now works somewhere else. And this person was extremely frustrated in that he desperately wanted to help create a better image for Korea in the US, but he found there was no way he could actually engage with official authorities back in Korea to participate in doing that. So that is the main focus of my interest right now.
So just to follow up my first question, the real question that I have is in such a process with this kind of qualitative research rather than quantitative research, there would be quite a lot of bias related to this kind of research. And maybe some people will approach you and then try to help. And even when I think about when you define Korea as a very complicated one, just even I wonder where is your criteria or standard, just with which country you compare and define that Korea as a complicated country. Because so far as I think, because I was born there, have grown up there, and even I live here, I think that Korea is a pretty simple country. Maybe just divided a little bit different between north and south, but quite simple. So I was curious where you get.
Okay, I'll give you the clearest illustration I can give of that. As a European, I don't claim to speak on behalf of all Europeans, but as a Western European, the draw for next year's FIFA World Cup recently took place. There's reports on the BBC, and you look at the groups, North Korea and South Korea both qualified. The way they were titled, they were both titled Korea, then in brackets, Republic, and then the other one with brackets, DPR. Now, for a foreign person looking on, that's complicated.
Mr. Krieg and then Mr. Sandler.
Ernie Krieg, Manufacturers Alliance. My question would be more about private sector economics. I have an observation and a question. Observation which you may want to respond to, which you do say in the paper, Korea does not appear to have benefited from the transference of brand equity and corporation to nation. And I wonder whether that hasn't been changing more in the last couple of years. Because it hasn't just been that Korea's big export of low-price goods, but is it quality brands, stylish products, technology, and maybe more the semiconductors and some electronics, the automotive sector is the most visible. And I mean, let me just say, in the last 10 days, I heard a presentation last week by Mr. Mark Killen, who's the CEO of, as you know, Fiat and Chrysler. And when I asked which nation's industry is out front in these respects, quality, etc., he said, well, it's Korea. They're ahead of Europe, the U.S. And if you read this week's Economist cover story, which 17 employee